Welcome back to yet another video. Are you struggling with the Spring Boot exceptions and the errors? Are you facing issues while developing the Spring Boot application? You are not alone. Every developer has faced the dreaded exception that derails their entire project. But don't worry, whether you are just starting out or you are an experienced Spring Boot developer, we have got you covered. Here are the top 10 most common exceptions the developer has encountered, and we are backing it with the complete detailed explanation, stack traces, practical solution, and the code changes. Whether you are a beginner or an expert, this solution will help you troubleshoot your Spring Boot application quite effectively. So get ready to solve the issues related to the bean creation, validation, transaction, database errors, and much more. So let's get started. So in this video, we are going to discuss the following below exceptions. No such bean definition exception, HTTP message not readable exception, method argument type mismatch exception, database data integrity violation exception, null pointer exception, illegal argument exception, transaction system exception, resource access exception, invalid data access API usage exception, or illegal state exception. So if you are facing one of these particular issues, please stay tuned, watch the video till the end, because we are going to give you an problem statement, what might be the problem which you are is causing the issue, and also will give you the solution step by step. So please stay back and watch the video till the end. So the very first thing we are going to look out it is no such bean definition exception. Now this is one of the important exception and most frequently faced exception by the developer, right? So when you are dealing with the beans, right, and you are dealing with a container that is in the Spring Boot dependency injection, that your the bean is not able to find that whatever the type required type, right? This is one of the cause. Okay, so let's look at the common causes. So it might be that you have not written at the rate component, at the rate service, at the rate repository, or at the rate controller annotation. So please make sure that you have done that. It might be that you have an incorrect package scanning as well, right? Typically, typographical errors in the bean names that might be also add up at this particular solution, right? Exception. So missing in or incorrect or at the rate auto wire or at the rate injection annotation, right? So this might cause this particular is no such bean definition exception. So make sure you check out all this. Now when you get an actual exception, right? That is no such bean definition exception. So if you see there is always like no qualifying bean of certain type, right? Let's say example like my services is not exception. So it is going to expect at least one of them which is going to be qualifying for this particular. So it has to auto wire that particular candidate. So that is the reason it throws an exception. Okay, by the container, the Spring Boot container. Now we'll look at the problem. Let's say what exactly it causes, right? So what happens if you look at the code snippet? Here is the on the left side you will see the problems which is actually causing that particular exception to be thrown. Now if you have a service written over there, and then if you see you have not written at the rate service on it, right? So this Spring Boot will not be able to scan this, and it is not going to create a bean of it, right? So that's where the when you try to auto wire that particular thing, you are definitely going to face an exception over there, right? Now, to solution to it is that you have to annotate it the at the rate service. I hope this particular resolution is quite simple, and I am sure definitely that you must have faced this particular issue, and you should have spent a lot of time to figure this out. Second, HTTP message not readable exception. Now, this is going to occur when the Spring is not able to, or is not going to, cannot parse that particular incoming HTTP request. That is a request body. So, typically, when you're passing either JSON or XML, in the formatted, there is some format issue. Okay, when when you're requesting something, that's caused the problem. Now, let's look at the common causes. What's as we already discussed, one is the invalid JSON or either an XML syntax, whatever it is there. like the attributes or like some space or comma, etc. It might happen that there is a mismatch between the request body and the expected Java object, whatever the it is going to expect. That might maybe also add up this particular exception. It might also have that particular at the rate request body is missing, or that it is in correctly specified the annotations, right? So this might add up to the exception. Now if you look at the actual exception, the stack trace, right? So you are going to get that http message not readable exception. Under that you will see that JSON parser error, like you cannot deserialize this kind of type of, let's say, DTO or kind of object, right? So you will have this particular nested exception, and you also always have to look out for the cause by. Now at the left side you will see, like the code causing that particular exception, right? So if you see, you have a TTO, you have a REST controller written, and under that if you see it is accepting that particular attribute request body, that my DTO. But if you see, you have written the attributes as name and the age, but if you look at it, the age is passing ABC, which is not of the correct type, right? It should be string. Now let's look at the resolution. Now, if you just correct that particular request body to change the type to age to integer or something like that, you will be able to fix that. I hope this solution is clear to you. Method argument type mismatch exception. Now this is one of the most common exception. This occurs when your method argument is not being able to convert to the expected type. Such the method is written something there in a such type, but when you pass it, right, the argument, you are you're not, it is not able to convert it. Like it might be the problem, like there is an incorrect URL parameters, or there is an incorrect query parameters. Okay, that is one of the problem. Second, there might be, like type mismatch between the request parameter and the method arguments. So this also is one of the most common issues. If you look at this particular method, text stack trace, right? If you see here, there is a method argument type mismatch exception. So the failed, it is going to fail to convert the particular value type of string, let's say, to the required long, right? So there at the client side, at the HL code, it is written the long, but you are passing something as a string, right? So this is going to be a for number format exception or something, like that is not going to accept that. So if you look at the particular code, right, if you see there is going to be some problem over here. If you see, I'm going to pass that particular ID. If you see at the rate get ID get mapping, right. If you see there is a long ID it is expecting, right. But let's say if you are passing something as a string, so what you have to do is that you ensure that particular URL parameter is a valid one, right. You are adding some validation at the controller side, right. That you have to ensure that you are adding some exception handling at the controller side. So this way you can solve this particular problem. Data integrity violation exception. Now this is one of the common exception when you are dealing with the database operation. It is going to violate some integrity constraints, like unique key violation, foreign key violation. There are different key constraints written over there. Now let's say you have some duplicate entries in the unique column. This might cause that particular problem. Whether you are trying to insert or update the data that is violating certain foreign key constraints. So you have to ensure that you are not violating such things when you are trying to insert or update something. Now let's look at this stack trace. Let's say data integrity violation exception. Now this is going to give you, like it is not going able to execute that particular statement. Whether it is it will give, like what kind of unique index error or primary key violation. It will exactly give you that particular exact key violation, like what column it is, like what statement it is causing the problem. Like it will give you a brief understanding of that part. So always look out for the stack trace. Now, if you look at this particular code snippet, okay, so here we have an entity written over here. Along with that, we have a service which is written, and under that, if you see, there is a create user. We are calling the repository over here. Okay, so under, if you see the REST caller, REST, I mean the controller, we have a service written over here, and ultimately this particular inside this create method we are calling this service, which is the create user method ultimately. So here if you see the create user method, The exception will be thrown if there is already an email which is going to be existed in the database, right? So it is not going to update or allow you to insert. Now, what you can do is that as a part of the solution, you can write a try catch block where it is going to gracefully handle your exception over there, right? So we already talked about if you gracefully handle in a proper way, or you have some response status. It is, if you look at this particular response, the creative user is null, right? Then it is going to return something response status as a conflict or something, right? So it is going to give a clear indication to the user that there is some problem at this side. So make sure you are dealing with the correct HTTP status and actually you are responding with the correct response. Null pointer exception. Now this is in general, I would say, millions of times people face it in one or another location. Now this is a classic exception, and it has been coming from the age old, right? So when you're trying to access certain or object which is having null as a value, right? So that's where you get this particular null pointer exception. Okay. So let's say you have not initialized certain objects. Let's say you have missed some dependencies, or let's say you have an incorrect method return value, right? That might add up this particular exception to be thrown up. Now you might see that null pointer exception is thrown, and then you can see that you cannot invoke certain method or on certain null value, right? That's what exactly the stack trace is about. You have to just find out that particular exact stack trace. Now, in order to check this, right? Now, if you see what might be the problem. Let's say if you have some string, right, and then you are trying to call some method on top of that. Always check that you are calling something, that particular method, if it is only null or not. If you see just before that particular line, string something is equal to null, and on top of that you are trying to call a method. Now, what you have to do is that add a null check before you are trying to access that, or you can make use of the optional feature to ensure that there is nothing null over there. You can ensure that there is a dependencies are properly being initialized. So there is a potential issue to be tracked up before you try to invoke something. Okay. So if you see here, we have used in the code snippet make use of optional of null. Illegal argument exception. This is one of the common exception which is thrown when the method receives an argument that is not valid. Okay. So let's say you have an invalid input parameters, you have incorrect data types, or that is out of range of that particular value. This particular illegal argument exception is thrown. Now, if you look at the stack trace, it is going to give you an exception stack trace which is caused by where it is going to say that the input is not, let's say, value is must be positive or something like that. It is similar to that, which is going to denote that it's an illegal argument. Now, if you look at this particular code over here, now if you see here at the there is an if block written over here. If the value is smaller than or greater than smaller than is equal to zero, then it is going should be going to throw an illegal argument exception, right? That's why it is going to return that such exception is thrown. It is going to be written as that. Now, as a resolution, what you can do is that you can input some validation at the method. You can use some assertion to check the validation. You can handle some exception in the controller at the controller side itself, right? You can catch that, and then you can actually send that particular request bad request body and get some message to be displayed. Transaction system exception. Now this is one of the common exception when you're trying to deal with the transaction. It fails to either commit or roll back. So either case where you're not able to go to a particular state, right, from where it has to roll back, or it is not properly committed. There might be some database issue, connection issues. There might be some concurrency conflict with respect to the threading, right, what you are trying to achieve. There might be some unchecked exception with you are going to deal within the transaction. Okay. So this add up to that particular exception to be thrown up. Now, if you look at the transaction system exception, it is going to, this will be one of the exception. Let's say could not commit the JPA transaction. You'll have that particular rollback exception or something like so error while committing the transaction, etc. You'll get that particular detail. So always search for that. Now, if you look at this particular thing, you have some certain, at the rate transactional being written at the top of that particular method, and then you see you're throwing something and as an error over here, runtime exception. Now you're going to simulate this transaction failure error, which is going to roll back that. Ultimately, ensure that your database connection is stable, there is no network connectivity issue, you are gracefully handling the exception within the transaction. If there is an exception, you are properly transact, you are using the proper transaction isolation level and the propagation level, so that you are bounded in that particular transaction and your transaction management is happening in a proper way. The exception, access exception, this exception occurs when there is an issue while accessing certain external resources. Let's say you are dealing with the network connections or you're trying to open a network file. So always there is a problem with the network connectivity, so this might cause the problem. Or there is some firewall restriction at your organization, or where you're trying to work in the environment, or there is a file system error. So these all things will add up to the resource access exception. Now, when you look at this particular exception, it is going to always show you that there are some IO related errors when you're trying to let's say just for an instance, for this particular exception there was an IO error, like you're getting some request at the trying to access certain URL, so it is going to refuse your connection, right? So it will give you the exact stack trace. There you have to stack trace and back track it and back. Now, if you see and look at this particular example, you are trying to call the REST template and you're going to call the external service over here, right? And it is going to return a string. But let's say the service is down, it is unavailable, right? So it is definitely going to throw an exception. So what you can do is that you can either implement a certain logics, like implement certain retry logic, or whether you can make use of the design microservice design pattern, that is circuit breaker design pattern, where it is going to gracefully handle the such request or default method is thrown back, or you can use resilience 4j as well. Okay, so here is going to check for that particular thing and it is going to return you that service is unavailable in that case. Invalid data access API usage exception. Now, this occurs when you are using the Spring Data JPA quite incorrectly. That the API where you are dealing with is incorrectly. So you have some detached entity, like you are dealing with objects in a transaction way where you are not you have detached that particular entity. Making use of the entity manager in the incorrect way, you have some wrong repositories methods to be called up, right? You're using different repository methods, which you're supposed to use some other methods. So in that case, when this particular exception is thrown, you have this particular detached entity passed to that particular persistent object. So always look out for that particular entity when you're dealing with that entity, and then there is exception is thrown for that particular, like detached entity. So there might be some other exceptions which might come up. So this is one of the example which I'm trying to showcase. So in this, if you see this in the example, we have this particular entity which is detached, right? And we are trying to save that particular entity here. Okay. But in this case, what will happen? The exception is thrown because this is not under certain transaction, right? So it will always throw that exception. So what you have to do is that you have to call entity merge to update that particular detached update, and it will bring it to the SIG. What you have to do is you have to fetch that particular entity from the database before you're trying to update something, or you're not aware, try to fetch that, or you're using the correct repository methods, right? That's what you have to make use of. Illegal state exception. Now, this is one of the most frequently exception which are caused. So when you're dealing with an object, it is in the inappropriate state, right? So when you're trying to perform some operations, yeah. So that is like calling some method which is in the wrong order, or you're accessing certain resources that is not even initialized, or you some have some invalid configuration, so it is not properly being written. So that's where you get this exception. So what you can do is that, let's say in example, the above example, let's say exception thread strip. So it says that you cannot create a session after the session response has been committed. So this is one of the common exception which is thrown, and always look out for this tag tricks. Now what you have to do is that when you are the actual causing code is that when you see the session dot attribute, which is you're trying to assign some value, and here you're getting something, right? So if you, before that you see the response.getWriter.write. You have already written that particular response and it is been sent up. But after that, you are trying to do some, writing something which is causing that exception. So always check out that your operations are performed in a correct order. Now, if you see this, the in this example, the sequence was not properly done. Second, the state of object before you are trying to perform. So always check that particular state. Second, always do the correct configuration. I hope this video was very helpful to you in knowing what kind of exception the Spring Boot Java developer faces every time in every project, in every organization. And they normally go via searching the Stack Trace, Stack Overflow, or Quora, or Google, right? So I tried to make this particular video so that you get a crisp solution for it. Uh, this video was helpful to you, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Also share it with the needy people.